The mission that I've had, the mission really and curiosity about leadership in the sense of what can make it better? How can we continue to improve as leaders? This was really the thinking when I started my journey, if you like, on this. The deeper exploration was prompted by the major disruptions that we've experienced in recent decades, but particularly the last 1.5 to 2 decades. That's the time of my focus. What I did discover is that while models were improving in the area of talent, our most untapped potential, our most important asset, not so much attention was being paid to leadership and how leadership evolved, whether it changed, whether there was something that defined leadership as we moved forward, as opposed to the tried and true of what we knew. I began with 3 questions. First was, what were the real, unmistakable game changers? What could we say that this is why leadership needs to be attentive? This is why leadership needs to be scrutinizing of what can be different to be more effective. The second question was, okay, so leaders can accept and embrace that there's some renewal required. Then what are the specific abilities, the capabilities that will set leaders apart? And then lastly, what would compel leaders who are already successful to embrace a mindset of becoming more self-aware, more discerning of how they could be better? What would lead them to pursue renewal? My leadership experiences had crossed all the sectors, not just in banking, but in academia, in health, and in a number of elements of public policy. So I was seeing things in those varied and diverse sectors, but I was seeing so much universality and common theme that I just wanted to explore. For example, I had repeatedly observed, and I codified it to some extent, those leaders who seemed to excel no matter what the changes were, no matter what the challenges were. Then there were those who were always what I would call good leaders, basically struggled here and there, but they were good leaders overall. And then a third category, of course, were those who couldn't sustain the challenges. Leadership is not timeless. What got us here won't keep us here. But the good news is that leadership can be learned, but it needs to be intentional. It doesn't happen just by osmosis. Certainly, crises do trigger change in leadership, but we shouldn't have to wait for a crisis to learn from what the crisis taught us and to sustain what's been taught. We should look at this every day through what I call intentional leadership. So now I will give you a few glimpses of those 3 unmistakable game changers that no leader is exempt from. The first one is what we've seen is the increased stakeholders and their expectations. We've moved from a more single focus on shareholder to multiple stakeholders, which brings with it so much more complexity and increased demands. There is, among many commonalities among the needs of stakeholders, the one commonality that I single out most, which has now become less silent and more illuminated in many ways, and that is the demand for truth, the demand for trust, and the demand for transparency. I call it the 3 T's. The second unmistakable game changer, which I'm sure you need no convincing of at all, is the changing workforce. The workforce is made up of intergenerational, intercultural dimensions, all of which bring with it new demands, new expectations, new needs for inclusion, needs for empowerment. It has significant implications for leaders who now have to tune in, who have to listen, who have to include, who have to find solutions that are involved with much more diverse thinking. And lastly, the third one, and this for sure, another big game changer, it arises from the extent to which strategies are now so short-lived. Mindset in leaders matters a lot. The degree to which they're open or closed, the degree to which they're teachable or dismissive, to the degree to which they're comfortable carrying on pure instinct and the comfort levels of yesterday. It's all very difficult. We, as leaders, do experience this at one time or another. But we have to understand that the notion of once a great leader, always a great leader, is just not true. So what do leaders need to focus more on in terms of specific abilities? 8 capabilities emerged over and over, repeatedly. Each has a chapter dedicated to each of these capabilities, explaining how leaders can think of them, how they can refine them, and how they can become more effective by them. All 8 are directly relevant to the increased emphasis on the human side of leading. They are personal adaptability, strategic agility, self-renewal, and those all relate to the mindset and ability of a leader. Certainty of character, truth, trust, and transparency, and empathy, those relate to the makeup and the values of the person. Empathy, for sure. And then the last 3, contextual communication with this changing workplace, this changing world, this more informed world, this curious world, this challenging world. There's something about communication that has needed to change. And I talk about the need for people to be told the why and not just the what of things. Spirited collaboration, the courage to allow dissent, the courage to allow differences, to encourage to allow spirited collaboration, and developing other leaders, of course. So what do I hope that you take away from this bit of time now? What I hope you'll take away, just a couple of things. One would be to start with reflection on your own leading, on leadership broadly, and just pick 1 or 2 habits that you want to change to be more effective. Also, no matter what stage you're at in your career, I hope you have a mentor. Or if you don't, I hope you'll get one. Did you know that while we've lived with the thought that mentors are either for very new people in roles, emerging leaders, or when you're a bit more junior, but 80% of CEOs, using that as the highest level of a leader, actually have 1 or 2 mentors. Develop the habit of assessing your own impact every day, because I think of leadership in the very broadest sense. It doesn't have to be a big title. It doesn't have to be a CEO. It doesn't have to be a big paycheck. People are leading every day. And leadership happens when someone, through their positive impact on someone else, comes from either wisdom, it comes from inspiration, or a form of empathy. Leadership happens in so many forms. It has so many roots.